Hey everyone, and welcome back to Twisted Talks. I'm Josh.
And Tanya.
So, obviously, this is jumping back into the Ted Bundy case. This is part two. If you haven't watched, well, not watched, if you haven't listened to part one, make sure to check that out first. Otherwise, you're going to be missing a shitload of information. And if you did already join us for part two, welcome back. So Tanya's gonna take it away with,
Yeah.
I want to say, arrest and stuff, is what we're on
Yes,
to. Great.
you're
So,
correct.
work
So,
away.
picture it. August 16th, 1975. Ted Bundy is cruising around in his VW Beetle, stoned to the bone and living his best life.
That is
Okay?
not where I thought this was going.
I I can't lie, I had a skit when I read
I'm
that when
like,
I was
this is
doing
the
my
first
research.
time the man has shown any bit of lackadaisiness.
Anything. Like,
And where does it get
so
him?
he honestly, right? So he was driving aimlessly. He'd no real destination in mind, and then he could see the lights of basically he saw lights, and he decided to drive towards the Kennecott Company Bingham copper mine. And
That's
while
a
on his way
mouthful.
there, he stopped. While on his way there, he stopped to check his map and light another joint. Now, he didn't see Sergeant Bob Hayward or his patrol car, and this would be a big mistake on Bundy's part.
If Bob's
So
your
the
uncle,
sergeant
then
had
go Bob, and good family you have.
go Bob. So the sergeant began following him, which Bundy later said made him very nervous, and he claims to not have realized it was a police officer following him. At one point, he went through a red light, and this, according to Bundy, is when the sergeant turned on his lights and when Bundy realized a cop was behind him. So he pulled into a gas station and got out of his car with Hayward parked about 4 feet behind him. Now, from Bundy's recollection, he remembers Hayward asking what he was doing in, quote, his neighborhood, and claims the sergeant asked why he didn't try to run so he could take his head off. Bundy was confused by the officer's anger, saying, I didn't fully understand it. I mean, there had been no crime committed in the vicinity that night. I wasn't on anybody's hit list at the time, as far as I know. If he lived where he said he lived, it was just a coincidence. Certainly, he didn't lure me into his neighborhood, and certainly I didn't seek him out. And that was a direct quote. Hayward conducted a cursory search of the bug and found that the passenger seat wasn't where it should be, as well as a 14-inch Jimmy bar. So Hayward called for backup, and when Daryl M. Ondrak of the Salt Lake City Sheriff's Office arrived, Bundy was kind of so shook by the situation that he ended up telling them that he had been to see Towering Inferno, which was a movie, I think. Ondrak asked for Ted's permission to search the car, and according to police, he consented, but according to Bundy and his counsel at later dates, he said he did not. Now, I think that he was so shook by this whole encounter with the police that he consented without meaning to, and then just tried to say he didn't.
And he was stoned.
Yeah. Fucking Egypt.
But I'm
So,
actually just curious as well, though, regardless of if he consented or not, if the officer was able to realize that he was stoned, is that not probable cause?
yeah. Yeah, it is. They have probable cause to search your car if they believe you're under the influence of drugs.
That's what I thought.
So when Ondrak searched the car further, he found handcuffs, an ice pick, a pantyhose mask, a ski mask, several short pieces of rope, and some torn pieces of white sheet. The evidence was taken, and Bundy was informed that a warrant would be issued against him for possession of burglary tools. Ondrak attended a weekly meeting of detectives from the area on the next Tuesday, and here he brought up Bundy's arrest, which caught the interest of Jerry Thompson. As Ondrak explained further about what he had found in Bundy's car, Thompson's mind was drawn back to Carol Durant, whose abductor had come across with an educated air. Thompson had a hunch that Bundy was the man they had been looking for, but his theory was met with much skepticism as Ted was a law student with no priors and political connections. The sheriff...
Law students can be like people in law have often been arrested for abuse of power and doing really, really bad things. And same with politicians. So I'm like,
Yeah,
why are they so quick to be like, oh, he's a student of law. How could he
he's
do
a good
this?
man. I don't know. They're just stupid.
He's
so
a Mormon.
The sheriff. He's a what? So the sheriff at the time, Mac Holly, said, quote, "Jerry, Bundy had nothing to do with our case, so forget him. Excuse me. The man didn't do our case. I wish you'd get that through your head," end quote. Still, Thompson persevered. He knew Carol Durant was the only one who could link Bundy to the case, but he also knew that it had been 9 months since her encounter and she had been shown thousands of mugshots. In police terms, she was a fatigued witness and might not be able to identify her attacker in court. He wanted to be sure of what information he had before visiting Carol, so he sent Bundy's mugshot and a photo of articles found in the Beetle to Bob Keppel in Seattle. And in a wild coincidence, at the time that Keppel had heard from Thompson, he and his team were beginning their investigation on number 7 on their list of TEDs that needed to be rechecked and investigated. Number 7 on the list was Theodore Robert Bundy. It was Ted Bundy. Thompson called Ira Beale to drive to Salt Lake City, where he picked up a copy of Bundy's mugshot, brought it back to Bountiful and showed it to Raylan Shepard, the Viewmont drama teacher, who said if he had a mustache, she was sure it was probably the suspect. This was hardly conclusive, though, as Raylan had seemed just as certain about another suspect, John Badway. On August 21st, Bundy was arrested for possession of burglary tools. He feigned indifference as he was brought to the station and fingerprinted, photographed, and booked. After his booking, Bundy was put in a small interview room to be questioned by Thompson's partner, Ben Forbes. He began asking questions about the things found in the car and kept the questioning consistent with a burglary case. Ted had an answer for everything. He said he had found the handcuffs in a bin and kept them because he had once had to fight someone off from stealing a bike in Seattle and thought that the cuffs would be helpful if the situation should arise again. He claimed the pantyhose mask was for wearing under his ski mask for added warmth when walking to classes in the winter, and that he had seen mountain climbers do it. He said the rope and shreds of sheet were for tying the oars of his rubber raft together, and that he regarded the ice pick as a common piece of household equipment. At the end of the interview, Forbes informed Bundy that he was a homicide detective and that Bundy was in fact a suspect in a kidnap and attempted murder case. Bundy was so caught off guard by this that he signed a consent form for his room to be searched. He was then brought out to a squad car and driven to his home. Police found patent shoes matching Durant's description of what her attacker wore, a Colorado road map, and a Colorado ski country guide from 1974 to 1975, which they took no notice of until they asked Bundy if he had ever been to Colorado, and he said no. They also found a brochure for a recreation center in Bountiful, a copy of Bundy's phone bill from June 1975, and a copy of his Chevron gas credit card bill. Bundy consented to these papers being taken and to photographing of his car. When the evidence was submitted, police noted an X on the ski guide next to the name of the Wildwood Inn, which is where Karen Campbell had disappeared from. Now, Carol Durant was unable to make an unequivocal identification of Bundy or his car, and it seemed as though the police wouldn't be able to arrest him until Mike Fisher called Thompson to inform him that he had run Bundy's Chevron card purchases and placed him in Glenwood Springs in Colorado on the day of Karen Campbell's disappearance, in Vail, Colorado on the day of Julie Cunningham's disappearance, and near Grand Junction on the day of Denise Oliverson's disappearance, as well as placing him near other abduction sites. And he had many links to the victims in the form of mutual friends or family members who knew them. Keppel said, quote, "We tried to eliminate the son of a bitch. You can't do it. We knew where he ate, where he slept, where he took his shits, but you just couldn't tell where he was on the days those girls disappeared," end quote. On October 2nd, 1975, Bundy was called in for a lineup with witnesses Carol Durant, Raylan Shepard, and Tamra Tingy. Police were surprised when Bundy showed up with a new hairdo, and they had to actually dismiss the men that they had originally selected for the lineup and replace them with police officers, because Bundy had changed his hair and a couple of things about his face to, I suppose, kind of try and throw off the witnesses and throw off the lineup. So Thompson was concerned that the witnesses wouldn't recognize him due to similarities between all the men in the lineup, but to his surprise, they did. And so Bundy was charged with kidnap and attempted murder with bail set at $100,000. Bundy stood trial
That
for the
doesn't really seem like
kidnapping.
a very high bail.
I suppose in the 70s, it would probably be a lot. It would
Oh,
probably
yeah,
amount
that's
to a
true.
lot. So Bundy stood trial for the kidnapping of Carol Durant in February 1976, and under advice from his attorney, John O'Connell, who was supposedly one of the best criminal defense attorneys at the time, he waived his right to a jury trial. This was due to the negative publicity that had followed the case and the trial. He instead had a bench trial, which is a trial by judge, and this trial lasted 4 days. After a weekend of deliberation by Judge Stuart Hanson Jr., he was found guilty of kidnapping and assault. In June, he was sentenced to, get this, 1 to 15 years in prison.
That's so little.
Which he was to serve at the Utah State Prison. That October, Bundy tried to escape, but was found hiding in the bushes with his escape kit, which included road maps, airline schedules, and a social security card. This landed him in solitary confinement for a few weeks, and later in the month, he was charged with Karen Campbell's murder. Bundy had restored and sold his car after posting bail under the guise of needing to pay for John O'Connell's legal services, and authorities had tracked it down, confiscated it, and stripped it, leading to the discovery of hairs belonging to Karen Campbell, as Josh mentioned earlier. And after some resistance, Bundy eventually waived the extradition process, and in January of 1977, he was transferred to Aspen to be tried. And now it's your turn, Josh.
So, on the 7th of June 1977, Bundy was moved 40 miles or 64 kilometers from the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs to Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for a preliminary hearing. As Bundy was a former law student, he decided to represent himself in court. The judge on his trial allowed Bundy to be excused from wearing handcuffs and leg shackles and allowed him the chance to visit the courthouse law library so that he could research his case. This would lead to Bundy conducting his first proper escape. So as you can imagine, these privileges he had been given later came under fire. So on that same day, June 7, 1977, while Bundy was taking a break from court during the preliminary hearing, he saw an open window in the library and he seized the opportunity to escape. Later, during a phone call,
I'm out.
He said, yeah, fuck this shit, I'm out. Later, during a phone call with Dr. Al Carlisle, a prison psychologist, Bundy said, the guard went outside for a smoke, the windows are open and the fresh air is blowing through, and the sky was blue, and I said, I'm ready to go, and walked to the window and jumped out. Honest to God, I got sick and tired of being locked up. So yeah, just cash. But the jump was, however, around 30 feet, meaning that when Bundy hit the ground, he hit the ground hard, which caused him to sprain his ankle. He had no plan, no backup, and no money. Bundy removed a layer of his clothing and then made his way towards the nearby Aspen Mountains. 10 minutes into Bundy's escape, the authorities realized what was happening and they began to set up roadblocks across town, and they put all citizens on high alert. Bundy hiked up the Aspen Mountain and he broke into a hunting cabin where he stole supplies and a rifle before leaving the cabin to continue on. Bundy ended up roaming around the forest for days after getting lost and disorientated. He eventually went down the mountain and returned to Aspen with the intention and hope of stealing a car. Bundy was sleep deprived and obviously in pain from his untreated sprained ankle. So when he did manage to steal a car, he was driving so erratically that it wasn't long before it caught the attention of police officers who pulled him over. Ted Bundy was back in custody after 6 days on the run. He might not have been free for long, but this wasn't going to stop him from trying again.
Yep.
He was so persistent. In jail, he wasn't raised to be a quitter, apparently.
Mama may have raised a murderer, but she didn't raise no quitter.
Yeah. In jail once again, Bundy disregarded the advice of legal advisors to stay put. Imagine having to advise your client, please stay put.
Yeah, please
the
just
case
stay
against him. Yeah, just please stay there. don't do any worse. The case against him was already weak at best, and it was steadily deteriorating as pre-trial motions consistently resolved in Bundy's favour, as well as significant bits of evidence being ruled inadmissible. Quoting from the book, The Only Living Witness, The True Story of Serial Sex Killer Ted Bundy, by Stephen McCaud and Hugh Ainsworth, a more rational defendant might have realised that he stood a good chance of acquittal, and that beating the murder charge in Colorado would probably have dissuaded other prosecutors. With as little as a year and a half to serve on the Duranch conviction, had Ted persevered, he could have been a free man.
Yeah, like he could have got out after the year.
Yeah.
If he
It goes without saying.
run away.
Yeah, literally. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. When Bundy was back in prison, he was stripped of all his privileges. But Bundy did not waste any time and jumped right into planning his next escape.
I hear no.
And might I say the brains for this one and the commitment.
To be fair, he was extremely intelligent. Like he really just was. There's no way around it.
Yeah, it's weird. But Bundy realised that his last attempt at escaping had failed due to a lack of planning, so this time he began stashing money. But he had built up around $500 in cash over the next 6 months, the most of which had been smuggled in by his later wife, Carol Ann Boone. Bundy had also managed to get a floor plan of the jail, as well as a hacksaw from fellow inmates, because, anyway, apparently you can get anything in prison. There was an unsecured grate or something like that in the ceiling of Bundy's cell. Of all the cells they could have put him in, of course it was that one. Well done to them.
Bundy's was the worst they could have.
Yeah. Bundy had planned on cutting a hole around it so that he could squeeze through the small gap before making his way along the crawl spaces above to one of the jailer's rooms. However, the hole he was going to carve into the ceiling would be so small that he needed to lose weight in order to be able to fit. This man was really thinking things through down to the last detail, like this time, down to his weight.
He learned from his mistakes.
Yeah, well, not by any of the important ones, but yeah.
Yeah.
By the 30th
in ways that serve him.
Yeah, exactly. In self-serving ways, he learned from his mistakes. By the 30th of December 1977, Ted Bundy had lost around 2.5 stone, and he was ready to put his plan in motion. Most of the prison staff were on Christmas break at the time, and Bundy got to work. He placed books onto his bed in a way that when he covered them with blankets, it kind of looked like someone was sleeping underneath it. Before he made his way up through the grate in the ceiling, crawling towards a nearby jailer's room. Once he was above the jailer's room, he broke through the ceiling and dropped down. The jailer was out for the evening, giving Bundy time to get some normal clothes from the jailer's closet. Bundy changed into the normal clothes and he walked right out the front door of the prison, back into the free world once again.
Oh my God.
And not only on top of that, it would not be until around 17 hours later before anyone even realised that Bundy was missing. And by this time, Bundy had already stolen a car, gotten on a flight, and gotten a bus in order to get all the way to Chicago, about 1,100 miles away.
That is madness.
Yes. So,
oh
now,
my God.
You know, he was committed to his escape. But anyway, and now it is over to you.
So, after leaving Chicago, Bundy travelled to Ann Arbor in Michigan via train. He stayed there for 5 days before stealing a car again and driving to Atlanta, Georgia. And from there, he took a bus to Tallahassee in Florida. He stayed there for one night, lodging in a hotel, before choosing to rent a room at a boarding house near the Florida State University campus, using the name Chris Hagen. Bundy would later say he had intended on going legit. He was going to get a job and not kill anyone because he knew the police would never find him in Florida if he stayed off their radar. However, he had to abandon his one singular job application to a construction company after they asked for ID, and so he instantly reverted to his old habit and stealing money and credit cards from women who left their purses in their shopping carts at local grocery stores.
Standard.
He would also cruise Florida State University's library and steal cash and cards from unsuspecting students. Soon, Bundy's need to kill began to outweigh his need to stay hidden from the police. So 1 week after arriving in Tallahassee, on January 15th, 1978, Nita Neary returned to Chi Omega sorority at around 3 a.m. She kissed her boyfriend goodbye and went inside. When she did, she heard a thump upstairs, followed by the sound of someone running down the stairs. As she approached the house's front doors, she saw a man crouched low down by the doors. He appeared to be holding a club of some kind wrapped in dark cloth, and in the next instant he was out the door and gone. Nita immediately ran upstairs and woke her roommate, Nancy Dowdy. The two girls went downstairs to make sure all the doors were locked, and as they were telling their house president, Jackie McGill, about the incident, another housemate, Karen Chandler, stumbled from her room walking towards them with blood flowing from her face as she had been brutally beaten. Nita ran down the hallway shouting for everyone to get up out of bed, while Jackie went to Karen's room and found Kathy Kleiner, another housemate. She was sitting on the bed, legs crossed, gurgling blood from her mouth and moaning unintelligibly. When the police arrived on the scene, they discovered two more of the housemates dead in their rooms. Margaret Bowman had been attacked first, and she was found last by the police. She had been murdered with several blows to the head and potentially strangled, and had had her underwear removed so forcefully that she actually had a friction burn on one of her thighs.
Oh, fucking hell.
Now the next victim, I'm unsure of how to pronounce her name. It's Levy, so I think it's Levi. But it could be Levy, but I'm going to say Levi. So Lisa Levi was killed next after Margaret, and she was found on her bed, lying on her stomach, and her neck was, quote, twisted in an inhuman fashion. She had been strangled with a pair of pantyhose, attacked so viciously that her jaw was broken, and sexually assaulted in such a brutal fashion with a can of hair mist that some of her internal organs had been ruptured. She also had bite marks on her left buttock and her right breast, with the bite on her breast being so deep that it almost severed her nipple, and led police to initially believe, police initially believed she had been shot because it was so bad. After killing Lisa and Margaret, Bundy made his way into Kathy Kleiner's room, where he attacked her and left her with a broken jaw and a deep laceration on her shoulder, before moving on to attack Karen Chandler and leaving her with a concussion, a broken jaw, missing teeth, and a crushed finger. It's thought that Bundy was spooked by headlights, and that's why he left when he did. After leaving the Chi Omega house, Bundy travelled 6 blocks to Dunwoody Street, where he climbed in the kitchen window of Cheryl Thomas's house. He wore a pair of pantyhose with eyes cut out as a disguise and attacked Cheryl in her sleep. Fortunately, a neighbour heard the noise and heard Cheryl whimpering and called the police. When they arrived, Bundy was spooked and took off, leaving Cheryl for dead on her bedroom floor. Cheryl survived the ordeal, but her jaw was broken in 2 places, which severed a nerve that led to her left ear. This caused balance issues that meant she had to give up dancing. Cheryl was also left with permanent hearing loss on one side and a dislocated shoulder, as well as 5 skull fractures, and she was brought to the hospital in a coma. She spent weeks recovering, and during the attack, Bundy had removed his pantyhose mask and left it on the bed for whatever reason, and investigators found semen on the bed, although there was no evidence of Cheryl being sexually assaulted. And these crimes were particularly brutal.
I think it's because I suppose he's probably devolving at this stage, but also the fact that he is not stupid. He knows that they're probably going to know straight away that this is him because he just escaped prison.
Yeah. So he's like, fuck it, go big or go home.
Yeah, he's like, I have nothing to lose. Everyone knows what I look like, so.
Yeah, so on February 8th, Bundy travelled to Jacksonville, Florida in a van that he had stolen from Florida State University. He approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter in a car park and identified himself as Richard Burton, stating he was with the fire department. But he was scared off when Leslie's older brother confronted him, and Leslie was also, her dad was a police officer. That afternoon, he drove west to Lake City. At this time, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach went missing after being called to her homeroom by a teacher to get her purse, which she had left there.
Where did you say it was he had driven to?
Lake City.
Oh, Lake City, okay.
So Kimberly never returned to class after going to get her purse. And 7 weeks later, following an extensive search, her partially mummified remains were discovered in a shed near Suwannee River State Park, and this was 35 miles or 56 kilometers northwest of Lake City. Forensic experts have stated that Kimberly was raped before being killed by having her throat cut. By
hell, that's
February
particularly
12th,
aggressive.
yeah, and like she was 14.
Oh.
No, sorry, she was 12. She was 12. By February 12th, Bundy had run out of money and he had overdue rent. He also had become concerned that police were closing in on him again, so he stole a car and drove west across the Florida Panhandle. And on February 15th, at around 1 a.m., he was pulled over by Officer David Lee near the Alabama state line due to a warrant that had been issued for the Volkswagen Beetle that he had stolen and was driving at the time.
Oh my God, he's still
When
going
Lee
for Beatles.
Honestly, when Lee informed Bundy he was under arrest, Bundy kicked the officer's legs out from underneath him and took off running.
He was like, yeet!
How dramatic. Yeet! So Officer Lee fired 2 warning shots before chasing and tackling Bundy to the ground. They fought over Lee's gun for a time, but the officer was able to subdue and cuff Bundy, placing him under arrest yet again. In the car, officers found 3 stolen IDs belonging to female students from Florida State University, 21 stolen credit cards, and a stolen TV set, as well as a pair of dark-rimmed non-prescription glasses and a pair of plaid slacks that were later identified as those worn by the supposed Richard Burton of the fire department in Jacksonville. Lee transported his suspect to jail completely unaware of who he had just arrested, and apparently on the drive he overheard Bundy say to himself, quote, "I wish you had killed me." And that's the end of that section.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure a lot of other people wish he had too.
Yeah.
So, on the 12th of June, 1979, the venue was for Bundy's trial for the murders of the Chiamega murders and assault was moved to Miami and set for the 25th of June. So on Monday, the 25th of June, 1979, the trial began. The trial was, hang on, let me just check something. Okay, that's fine. So then on Monday, the 25th of June, 1979, the trial began. The trial was televised and was apparently the first trial to be on national television. As well as that, 250 reporters from 5 different continents had applied for credentials to cover the trial, which was no doubt a nice ego boost for Bundy.
I would imagine.
Bundy's former lawyer, Michael Minerva, said that Bundy had initially agreed to plead guilty in order to get life imprisonment and to avoid the death penalty. However, when Bundy arrived in court, that is not what he did. Instead, he gave the following speech.
Oh, so, Jesus.
Here, this is what he had to say. It's my position that my counsel, like, this is pure delusional, the whole lot is. It's my position that my counsel, 1, believe that I am guilty. 2, that they have told me they see no way of presenting effective defence, and in no uncertain terms they have told me that. And 3, they see no way of avoiding conviction. Your Honour, if that does not raise itself to the level of ineffectiveness of counsel, I don't know what does. Man was like, yeah, I'll plead guilty, and then full on stood up in that courtroom and was like, fuck y'all, you ineffective people.
Roasted them.
Yeah.
In front of all those reporters and the national television crew.
Yeah, literally, like, and now, okay, just to clarify on that as well, I don't know if there was that many reporters actually there, but that was how many had applied to be there anyway.
Yeah.
But how many were there? I'm not sure. It could have been that amount, but I don't know. I surely isn't that amount. How would that many be fit in the courtroom?
Yeah, I'd hope not.
But yeah, so he literally went to town. He was like, nah, y'all are ineffective. And Bundy later admitted, he later actually admitted that he had no intentions, he never had any intentions of pleading guilty. Michael Minerva attempted to actually withdraw himself from the case, but the judge only allowed him to step back into an advisory position. So I suppose, instead of actually being one of his attorneys, he was just kind of there to give advice to them. Um,
Yeah.
so in her book, in Polly Nelson's book, Defending the Devil, My Story as Ted Bundy's Last Lawyer, Polly said he had sabotaged the entire defense effort out of spite, distrust, and grandiose delusion. Ted had disrupted the proceedings, bantered with the press, and obstructed his lawyers.
He just fucked himself over, basically.
Yeah, he was just deluded. Bundy's lawyers attempted to bring up the issue of Bundy's competency, and not for the first time. The court decided to fix the arguments between them by initially making Bundy co-counsel of his defense team, but eventually they made him chief counsel, making the others on the defense team basically standby counsel. As in, they're there if he needs them or if he calls on them, but he's in charge.
He said, "You're ineffective, I'm taking over."
Yeah, and the judge was like, right, the easiest way to fix this is to let him be in charge and just ask you when he needs help. Can we just take a minute to recall how Bundy never actually finished law school, and he's here thinking he can successfully represent himself and I guess get away with the crimes as well or something. Like, that's not only delusion, but and word I mentioned earlier as well, but that's what I would consider part of his devolution, as Criminal Minds would put it. Because I'm honestly not sure if that's a real life term in for criminals and stuff like that. But anyway, no doubt he thought he could use that.
Yeah.
No, what were you going to say?
I was just going to agree with you. Devolving and devolution would be the only terms that I could think of to explain the spiral he's currently on.
And I'm like, I don't know, do they use that in real world crime? But I'm like, Criminal Minds is my world.
Yeah, it's real to us.
Yeah, we live amongst it. So no doubt he thought he could use his deadly charm and charisma and whatever he retained from law school to help himself out, is what I'm thinking, because I don't know. But ultimately he as good as signed his own death certificate by representing himself, really. On the 24th of July 1979, Bundy was found guilty and convicted of the murders of Chi Omega sorority members Margaret Elizabeth Bowman and Lisa Levi. He was also found guilty and convicted on 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder and 2 accounts of burglary. He was given 2 death sentences by means of the electric chair for the murder convictions. On the 21st of July 1978, so that was a year before the guilty verdict now in the case I just spoke of. So a year before the guilty verdict in the case of the Chi Omega murders and assaults. Bundy had also been charged with the kidnap and murder of Kimberly Leach. The trial had been set to take place in Suwannee County in Florida. However, after that, Bundy moved for a change of venue or for abatement of prosecution. Now, abatement in law is the interruption of legal proceedings after the defendant has pled of a matter that prevents the plaintiff from going forward with the suit at that time or in that form. Now, in this case, the defense being Bundy and the plaintiff being the state of Florida. Now, I don't know what Bundy thought was a good reason for abatement. That was surely just him chancing his arm, to be honest. I can't think of any logical reason for it.
The man, from my research, was an absolute chancer.
Yeah, literally, as you'd expect, the motion for abatement was denied, but the request for a change of venue, however, was granted, and the case was moved to the Circuit Court in Orange County, Orlando, Florida. So on the 7th of January, then, 1980, we're going into now, in the Orange County Courthouse in Orlando, the Kimberly Leach trial began. For once, in terms of his defense, Bundy actually made some sort of smart decision, which was not to represent himself. He handed, exactly, we're getting somewhere. He handed over responsibility to defense attorneys Julius Africano and Lynn Thompson. Their defense strategy was to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. It was a risk to make a plea of insanity, but it was one of the only routes left to take at this point.
Yeah, that's all they had.
Yeah, it was I don't know. I can't find the word, so I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, that's the what I was looking for. Yeah. Unlike in the other hearings, Bundy began to get increasingly agitated as the trial went on. At one point, he had even stood up and began shouting at a witness because he did not agree with them. It was looking like Ted's facade of confidence was beginning to disappear. He had likely realised by now that he had already lost, and this legal battle would not make much of a difference in determining his fate. After all, he already had 2 death sentences from the Chi Omega trial.
Mm-hmm.
So, like,
He's got nothing to lose.
yeah. So 1 month after that trial began, Judge Wallace Jopling asked the jury to deliberate. It took the jury less than 7 hours to return with a guilty verdict. On the 9th of February, which was the second anniversary of Kimberly Leach's death, the sentencing trial began. During the penalty phase of the trial, you will not believe what happened.
Oh,
Ted
God.
Bundy was interviewing defense witness Carol Ann Boone, and during his questioning, what did Ted Bundy do? He asked Carol, "Do you want to marry me?"
No.
And Carol confirmed that she
No.
did, and Carol confirmed that she did want to marry him. Bundy stated that he also wished to marry her, and then said, "I do hereby marry you." And wait for this, because this is what makes out that he was even so smart. He must have learned something. According to Florida law, the two were now legally married, as their vows were said in front of a judge and a notary and under oath. What a wedding. So he basically manipulated the system to get married.
He proposed to her, she accepted, and they got married in a matter of seconds.
Literally, because there was a judge present and a notary present, it was considered a legal marriage.
That has to be the world's quickest marriage.
They played the system. So, and
Yeah.
then I had to say then, his wedding gift from the trial, however, was another death sentence via the electric chair, bringing his death sentence count to 3.
Congratulations. You get yet another electric chair.
Yeah.
It's your third.
So
congrats.
It's like, well done, 3 and counting. And the evidence against him in the trials consisted of eyewitness testimonies. So this is kind of the evidence, through all the trials, kind of really, that I suppose consisted of eyewitness testimonies, hair and clothing fibre, as well as blood evidence, and as you mentioned, the bite mark that was left on one of the Chi Omega victims. However, nowadays, using bite marks as evidence is apparently largely discredited and controversial.
Okay.
I didn't go into detail on that. Look into it if you want to, but I'm sure it's still used, but it's a bit controversial.
Okay.
Now wait for this. Conjugal visits were not allowed at Florida State Prison, where Bundy was incarcerated, but had clearly happened because Carol Ann Boone would later give birth to Bundy's daughter.
Stop.
It is said that inmates at the prison were known to put all of their money together to bribe guards to give them some intimate time alone with their female visitors.
Stop.
Yeah, and that is that section. So I will hand the reins over to you.
Prison into a brothel.
Yeah,
Casually. So after the Kimberly Leach trial had concluded, which was the final trial where he quickly married Carol Ann, apparently.
Yeah,
as you do. A lengthy appeals process began, and this is when Bundy initiated interviews with Stephen McCod and Hugh Ainsworth. During these interviews, Bundy would often speak of his crimes in the third person. So instead of saying, "I strangled her," he would say, "The killer may have strangled her," or "He strangled her." And this was his way of avoiding, in McCod and Ainsworth's opinion, the kind of stigma of confession. Because at this point he'd already been done for the fucking crimes. So like he's well past the point of stigma. So Bundy also met with and confided in Special Agent William Hagmeyer of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. And sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback.
Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. It's sorted now, I think.
Okay. Is that why you were so quiet?
Yeah, because I was really confused because my AirPods started to die, so I put them in the case, but I never closed the lid of the case, so I could really quietly hear you, and I was like, that's not my phone. And it's because the sound was coming through the bloody AirPods still.
Okay, are you caught up on where I am? Did you hear? You needed to hear?
I think so. But I'm present again now.
Okay, welcome back. So I was saying, Bundy also met with and confided in Special Agent William Hagmaier of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. And yeah, I was like, oh my God, it's a real thing.
Fangirling. Not over
Yeah,
them, but over the
BAU. And during their interviews, he indicated to Hagmaier that he had killed about 30 women and young girls and confessed to taking Polaroid pictures of his victims. And I forgot to say earlier, when the police searched his room when he was first arrested, that night he was stoned to the bone, he actually said later that they had missed Polaroid pictures, so he was able to go back get them, and he got rid of them.
Oh my God.
Because they were hidden. They were hidden somewhere. I can't remember where.
They were one of the things that he hadn't just had lying around.
Yeah. So he actually said about taking the Polaroid pictures. He said, quote, "When you work hard to do something right, you don't want to forget it." And then Hagmaier would speak with Stephen McCaud and Hugh Ainsworth, and he said to them that Bundy seemed to take a deep, almost mystical satisfaction in killing his victims.
Yeah.
And quoted Bundy to them, and Bundy had said to Hagmaier, quote, "After a while, murder isn't just a crime of lust or violence, it becomes possession. They're a part of you. After a while, when you plan these, that person becomes a part of you, and you are forever one. Even after 20 or 30, it's the same thing because you're the last one there. You feel the last bit of breath leaving their body, and you're looking into their eyes, and basically a person in that situation is God. You then possess them, and they shall forever be a part of you. And the grounds where you kill them or leave them become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them."
Yeah. That.
Yeah. Very that. So on Monday, January 16th, 1989, a black bordered death warrant was drawn up to be signed by Governor Martinez, and it would be in effect for 7 days. The following day, against advice from his counsel, Bundy notified law enforcement that he was ready to talk. He believed he could buy himself more time by giving police officials details of his crimes, but Governor Martinez squashed all hopes of a bargain, saying, quote, "We are not going to have the system manipulated. For him to be negotiating for his life over the bodies of others is despicable." On Friday, January 20th, 1989, Bob Keppel visited Bundy in prison, and Bundy confessed to Georgianne Hawkins' murder, confirming that she was the third body found with Denise Naslund and Janice Ott in Issaquah. He also confirmed that he had killed the 3 girls found on Taylor Mountain, as well as Donna Manson and 3 more victims in Washington who he would not identify to Keppel. Keppel later said that Bundy was offended when he didn't want to hear about why he had committed the murders. Bundy broke into tears as he confessed that he was afraid to face the electric chair, and that he was hoping Governor Martinez and prison officials would allow him to live longer if he cleared up all the murders, saying, quote, "I'm not asking for clemency, I'm not asking to get off. I'm not asking for sympathy, but I draw the line. We need a period of time, 16, 90 days, a few months, systematically going over it with everybody, top, bottom to top, everything I can think of, get it all down. You can use it how you see fit. Now, if you see a way, I know you're limited in what you can do, and you've got a job and your political considerations and all that." This is long-winded, by the way. "And your boss apparently has taken a position against this. But all I can tell you is that when you go out to those other people, you can tell them this. Yes, I'm only going to give you part of it. I'll give you something substantial right now to show you that my head is in the right place. A couple of months is not going to make a difference." In addition to his pleas to Keppel, one of Bundy's lawyers, Diana Weiner, asked some of the victims' families to petition Governor Martinez for a postponement, to give him time to reveal more information, but the families declined, and so did Keppel. Now, during his time on death row, Bundy also admitted to the murders of Julie Cunningham, Deborah Kent, and Nancy Wilcox. He adamantly denied Nancy Baird's murder and refused to discuss Karen Campbell and Denise Oliverson. All in all, he had confessed to 11 murders in Washington, 8 in Utah, 3 in Colorado, 3 in Florida, 2 in Oregon, 2 in Idaho, and 1 in California. On Tuesday, January 24th, 1989, shortly after 7 a.m., Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the Rayford electric chair. Before his execution, he spoke with his mother, saying, "I'm so sorry I've given you all such grief, but a part of me was hidden all the time. But the Ted Bundy you knew also existed." At 4:47 a.m., Bundy was brought his last meal. He had made no specific request, so he was given steak and eggs, and a glass of water. But he
What a
only drank
random
the water.
pairing.
Honestly, so he only drank the water. Jim Barton interviewed him once again, and this was when Bundy confessed to the murder of 15-year-old Susan Curtis in Utah in 1975, as well as confessing to Denise Oliverson's murder. His last words were, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family." And then
he was zzz.
Mm.
But okay. That's that. He was... Yeah. They weren't taking his shit. They were like, "No, we're not waiting no more. You're going."
You're taking no chances.
Yeah. They were like, "You ain't escaping again." So, then just kind of MO and the kind of people he went for is what I'm covering next. So Ted Bundy was, as we know, a very organized and cunning criminal. Bundy clearly used his extensive knowledge of law enforcement methods to avoid identification and capture for a very long time. His crimes were spread over such a large area that his victim count was at least 20 before it became apparent to investigators from various jurisdictions that they were all after the same criminal. As I'm sure you've all picked up on already, Bundy's favourite way to assault his victims was blunt trauma and strangulation, both fairly quiet techniques that could be easily accomplished with any easily available item or tool. Most people would probably have something in their home that could be used for either method. It is said that he avoided the use of guns because, one, they're loud, and two, they leave behind ballistic evidence. Bundy would look into every detail to make sure he would not be caught, taking in his surroundings down to the last detail to find the safest spots to grab and dispose of victims. It was strange how well he could keep physical evidence to a minimum. His fingerprints were never found at any crime scenes or any other form of indisputable evidence of his guilt, which he made sure to remind people of during the time that he tried to convince others of his innocence. It is said that law enforcement complained early on that he looked different in every photo taken of him. He was very good at changing his look and his expressions. According to Stuart Hansen Jr., the judge in the Carol Durant trial, in person, quote, his expression would change his whole appearance, that there were moments you weren't even sure that you were looking at the same person. He really was a changeling. Now, I didn't know what a changeling was, so for those of you that also might not know, no, it's I was like, what? It's a human-like creature believed to be a fairy that has been left in the place of a human, usually a child, that has been kidnapped by other fairies.
Oh, Josh, did you ever hear the case down in, I want to say it was in Clonmel?
Oh.
Hang on now. Give me a second.
It's close anyway, wherever.
Yeah, like I know it's somewhere close. Bridget Cleary, the case of Bridget Cleary. So she was murdered by her husband in 1895 because he thought that she was a changeling. He thought she'd been abducted by fairies and had been replaced with a changeling.
Oh my God.
So basically she went missing and she'd had bronchitis, and then she was supposedly going to die according to a priest, and then she just started getting better, but her father and her husband were like, "No, she's a changeling." And
yeah, they were like, the priest said that she can't get better, so that can't be her. She's gone.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure they burnt her because she was a changeling.
That is crazy.
A little bit of Irish history.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that.
No, sorry, it was Tipperary. It was Ballyvadley.
Oh, okay. Well, Tipperary is not far anyway. So, um,
Um, of course, Bundy was aware of his ability to change his appearance and his overall look, and would often make small changes to facial hair or hairstyle to change his appearance when he needed to, like when you said about coming in for the lineup.
Yeah.
And the only really distinctive feature Bundy had was a dark mole on his neck, but he would hide that by wearing things like turtleneck shirts and sweaters.
Mm.
Um, Even tracking his vehicle down was difficult. Some witnesses had described it as as metallic, others non-metallic. Some had said it was tan or bronze, and others had said light brown or dark brown.
Mm.
Um, over time, Ted Bundy's organization and sophistication evolved, which, according to FBI experts, is typical when it comes to serial killers. Um, Bundy started off forcing his way into homes and attacking a sleeping victim with a blunt weapon. However, as time went on, he became more organized in choosing his victims and his crime scenes. As we've seen earlier in the case, when we spoke about attacks, he would frequently lure victims into his car or to near his car where he would have some sort of weapon, typically a crowbar.
Mm.
Um, and in multiple instances, he wore a plaster cast on one of his legs or a sling on an arm, sometimes using crutches, and then would ask for help bringing something to his car. Um, or putting something in his car. Bundy was seen as handsome and charismatic, and he knew it, and he used it to his advantage to gain the trust of his victims,
Mm.
as well as people that were around him in his day-to-day life. If in a situation where Bundy could not rely on his looks and his charm alone, he would impersonate a firefighter or a police officer, and once his victim was near enough to his care, he would overpower them, bludgeon them, and then handcuff them before driving to a destination that he would have already chosen, and launch his attack. I suppose the full extent of his attack. Um,
Yeah.
this destination would usually be a fair distance away. He would strangle them with a wire or cord while raping them. When it comes to his victims in Utah, the site he would bring them to was his apartment building. Near the end of his killing spree, when in Florida, as we know, he went back to random attacks on sleeping victims, which could have been a
Yeah.
regression brought on by the stress of being a fugitive.
Yeah.
Um,
And also, I
Bun
think with how violent they were as well.
yeah, exactly. Um, but like he was probably like taking out this aggression that he wasn't getting away with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, Bundy would also remove victims' clothes to burn them later, another countermeasure, no doubt, except for at least one case where he put the clothes in a Goodwill collection bin.
Oh,
Um,
that's so fucking
Bundy,
random.
yeah, exactly. Like weird. Bundy explained that removing the victim's clothes was not only a practical matter to minimize the chance of leaving any evidence against him, but it was also ritualistic. Ironically enough, however, a manufacturing error in the fibres of his clothes are what gave a crucial incriminating link to the Diane Leach killing.
Okay.
Um, Bundy would also frequently visit the secondary sites where he had left a victim's body to engage in necrophilia and to groom or
Oh.
dress, yeah, and to groom or dress up the body.
Oh my god.
Like some of the victims had been found wearing clothes that they had never worn or even nail polish that family had never seen before.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and this and that you mentioned this already, I'm sure, about the Polaroid pictures
Yeah.
of his victims and saying later saying when you work hard to do something right, you don't want to forget it.
Yeah. Like,
Um
oh.
Now, according to Bundy, drinking large amounts of alcohol was essential. He apparently needed to be extremely drunk while on the prowl in order to significantly diminish his inhibitions and to sedate the dominant personality that he was so scared might prevent his inner entity from acting on his impulses. I call bullshit on that reasoning. You're just a
Yep.
horrible cunt, but moving on.
Yep. Just bad.
Um, all of Ted Bundy's victims were white females, most of them from middle class backgrounds. The majority of them were between the ages of 15 and 25. Obviously, there was a couple younger,
Yeah.
um, and I think some older maybe than the
Yeah.
25 mark, but that was the average. And most were also college students. He would
Yeah.
never approach anyone that he may have met before. And in their last conversation before Bundy was executed, he told Elizabeth Klopfer that he had purposely stayed away from her, quote, when he felt the power of his sickness building in him, unquote.
How
Um,
kind. How
and
thoughtful.
what?
How kind. How thoughtful.
Yeah, I know. so genuine, so nice.
Yeah.
Anne Rule, in her book The Stranger Beside Me, made note that most of the identified victims had long straight hair that was parted in the middle, like Diane Edwards, the woman who had rejected him before they later got engaged, and then he rejected
Yeah.
her because that's not the height of pity. Not that my expectations for a serial killing rapist are high, though.
True.
Anne speculated that Bundy's animosity towards his first girlfriend is what triggered his very long rampage and caused him to target females who resembled her, which I think is a decent theory to put forward, given
Yeah.
the ages of a lot of his victims and the fact that his first girlfriend was during his college years.
Yeah.
Bundy, however, disagreed and claimed that his victims just fit the quote, this is quote now, just fit the general criteria of being young and attractive, unquote.
Interesting.
After the execution of Ted Bundy, Anne was not only surprised but troubled to hear from numerous sensitive, intelligent, kind young women who had written or called to say they were very depressed because Bundy was dead. Many of them had been
Stop.
corresponding with him, each believing that she was the only one. Multiple of these women had said they suffered nervous breakdowns when he died. Anne wrote, even in death, Ted damaged women to get well, they must realize that they were conned by the master con man. They are grieving for a shadow man that never existed.
What a fucking mad cunt.
Yeah. And then with that, over to you.
So this is just kind of a bit of, like, I suppose, psychiatry would be the word. So Bundy was examined by multiple psychiatrists, psychiatric experts. Sorry, had a little glitch. And the conclusions on these, like, assessments and examinations was very varied. Now, Dr. Dorothy Otnow Lewis, I think I mentioned her earlier, she was a professor of psychiatry at the New York University School of Medicine, and she initially diagnosed him with bipolar disorder, but it was said in my research that she would go on to change this multiple times, considering things like multiple personality disorder based on testimony from a family member who stated Bundy, quote, seemed to turn into an unrecognizable person, and Lewis's own experience where she said he underwent, quote, almost a complete change of personality, saying that day was the day I was afraid of him. Other experts believed Bundy was less likely suffering from bipolar disorder or a form of psychosis and more likely had antisocial personality disorder, a disorder which often has its patients diagnosed as psychopaths or sociopaths. Bundy was outwardly charming, charismatic, and enigmatic, but he had like little real personality or genuine insight. Like there wasn't much depth there, if you get me.
Yeah.
And he was able to tell wrong from right, but it had no impact on his choices or behaviors. And he had expressed a lack of guilt or remorse, saying, quote, guilt doesn't solve anything really. It hurts you. I guess I am in the enviable position of not having to deal with guilt. There was also evidence of narcissism, poor judgment, and manipulative behavior in Bundy, with one psychiatrist admitting sometimes he even manipulates me. Another expert suggested Bundy may have narcissistic personality disorder, but it's likely that we will never know for certain whether or not Ted Bundy did in fact have a mental disorder or what one he had. Shortly before his execution, Bundy spoke with James Dobson, a psychologist and founder of Focus on the Family, which is a Christian evangelical organization. He made claims to James Dobson that pornography was to blame for how he turned out.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. Saying that it happened gradually, and he kept finding himself looking for more and more explicit and graphic porn until it wasn't really doing anything for him anymore, and this is when he began hurting people. Some believe Bundy was being genuine in this interview, while others believe, and I also believe, that it was one last manipulation tactic and an attempt to shift the blame and culpability to something other than himself. So Bundy he operated under delusion that nobody ever takes any notice of anyone else.
Yeah.
And like he was surprised when people noticed his victims were missing, and he was surprised when people testified to having seen him during his murder spree.
Yeah.
And he once complained to Dorothy Otno Lewis, saying, quote, "I don't know why everyone is out to get me." Like, he knew what he had done to these women and these young girls, but he just didn't have any sense of the enormity of his actions. And like, while he confessed to his crimes, he consistently shifted the blame to aspects of his upbringing and to other people's actions, like his grandfather's abuse, his father's absenteeism, the media, the police, and pornography. Like, he knew he was caught, but he still just didn't want to take accountability.
Like, come on, bro.
Grow up, Ted. Back to you, my friend.
Like, he sounds like a literal, like, as in, like like the mental condition, not me just throwing the word around, a psychopath.
Yeah, diagnosed, surely.
Um, so now we're kind of just, obviously we've already kind of covered the confirmed victims and stuff in terms of like in order, but like now
Yeah.
we're kind of just moving on to a bit of just a quick snippets of it. So the night prior to the execution of Ted Bundy, he confessed to 30 homicides, but the true total remains unknown. Estimates of how many he may have committed have gone as high as 100 or more, and Bundy had from time to time made cryptic comments to encourage that speculation. Bundy told Hugh Ainsworth in 1980 that for every murder publicised, there could be one that was not. When FBI agents had proposed a total of 36 homicides, Bundy told them, add one digit to that and you'll have it.
So he was just feeding into all this.
Yeah, so like he was implying that the number, like with the FBI, should have been like 360 or 136, or, you know, like adding an extra digit.
Yeah.
Um,
Easing.
Reverend Fred Lawrence, the Methodist clergyman who gave Bundy his last rites, said, I don't think even he knew how many he killed or why he killed them. That was my impression, my strong impression. Um, the evening before Bundy was executed, he reviewed his victim count on a state-by-state basis for a total of 30 homicides, 11 in Washington, 8 in Utah, 3 in Colorado, 3 in Florida, 2 in Oregon, 2 in Idaho, and 1 in California, and not all of which were identified.
Yes.
So now we will go through the victims in order, which is 20 identified victims and 5 identified survivors. So Tanya, you can start with that one.
So we're starting in 1974 in Washington. So on January 4th, 18-year-old Karen Sparks, often referred to as Joni Lenz in Bundy literature, was bludgeoned and sexually assaulted as she slept in her bed. Karen survived the attack.
On the 1st of February 1974, Bundy bludgeoned 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy in her sleep and abducted her. He then decapitated and dismembered her post-mortem. Her mandible, a bone in the lower face, was recovered at the Taylor Mountain site in 1975.
On March 12th, 1974, 19-year-old Donna Gail Manson was abducted on her way to a concert at Evergreen State College. According to Bundy, her body was left at the Taylor Mountain site. They were never found there, but it is believed that partial remains found near Eatonville, Washington on August 28, 1978 could be Donna. Unfortunately, the remains and clothing found at Taylor Mountain, I believe, were destroyed on May 10th, 1985, before a positive forensic identification could be made. Sorry, my mistake. My apologies. It was the remains found near Eatonville that were destroyed.
Okay. On the 17th of April 1974, 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt vanished after attending an evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College. Her skull and mandible were also recovered at the Taylor Mountain site in 1975.
On May 6th, 1974, 22-year-old Roberta Kathleen Parks went missing from Oregon State University in Corvallis. Roberta's skull and her mandible were also found at the Taylor Mountain site in 1975.
On the 1st of June 1974, 22-year-old Brenda Carroll Ball disappeared after leaving the Flame Tavern in Borean. Her skull and mandible were also recovered at the Taylor Mountain site in 1975.
On June 11th, 1974, 18-year-old Georgianne Hawkins was abducted from an alleyway behind her sorority house at the University of Washington. Skeletal remains found at the Issaquah site were said by Bundy to be Georgianne Hawkins.
On the 14th of July 1974, 23-year-old Janice Ann Ott was abducted from Lake Sammamish State Park. Skeletal remains were recovered at the, what did you say, Issaquah? Issaquah site in 1974.
On July 14th, 1974, 19-year-old Denise Marie Naslund was also abducted from Lake Sammamish State Park. This was 4 hours after Janice Ott, and Denise's skeletal remains were found at the Issaquah site in 1974.
On the 2nd of October 1974, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox vanished in Holiday, Utah. According to Bundy, her body was buried near Capitol Reef National Park, 200 miles or 320 kilometers south of Salt Lake City, but her body was never found.
And on October 18th, 1974, 17-year-old Melissa Ann Smith disappeared from Midvale, Utah, and her body was found 9 days later on a hillside in Summit Park.
On the 31st of October 1974, 17-year-old Laura Ann Aim disappeared from Leahy, Utah. Her body was found by hikers in American Fork Canyon.
On November 8th, 1974, 18-year-old Carol Durant was abducted in Murray, Utah. Carol was able to escape from Bundy's car and survived.
On the 8th of November 1974, 17-year-old Deborah Jean Kent vanished after leaving a school play in Bountiful, Utah. According to Bundy, her body was left near Fairview, Utah, 100 miles or 160 kilometers south of Bountiful. Minimal skeletal remains were found and were positively identified by DNA as Deborah's in 2015.
And now we're heading into 1975, covering Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. And on January 12th, 1975, 23-year-old Karen Eileen Campbell vanished from a hotel hallway in Snowmass, Colorado. Karen's body was found 36 days later on a dirt road near the hotel.
On the 15th of March 1975, 26-year-old Julie Cunningham disappeared on her way to a tavern in Vail, Colorado. According to Bundy, her body was buried near Rifle, 90 miles or 140 kilometers west of Vail. Julie's body has never been found.
On April 6th, 1975, 25-year-old Denise Lynn Oliverson was abducted as she cycled to her parents' home in Grand Junction, Colorado. According to Bundy, he threw Denise's body into the Colorado River, 5 miles or 8 kilometers west of Grand Junction, and Denise's body has never been found.
On the 6th of May 1975, 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver was abducted from Alameda Junior High School in Pocatello, Idaho. According to Bundy, he threw her body into what authorities believe to be the Snake River. Lynette's body has never been found.
On June 28, 1975, 15-year-old Susan Curtis disappeared from a youth conference at Brigham Young University. Bundy said he had buried her near Price, Utah, which is 75 miles or 121 kilometers southeast of Provo. Susan's body has never been found.
On the 15th of January 1978, 21-year-old Margaret Elizabeth Bowman was bludgeoned, then strangled as she slept at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University.
Also on January 15th, 1978, 20-year-old Lisa Levi was bludgeoned, strangled, and sexually assaulted in her bed at Chi Omega sorority at Florida State University.
And also on the 15th of January 1978, 21-year-old Karen Chandler was bludgeoned as she slept at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Karen survived the attack.
And again on January 15th, 1978, 21-year-old Kathy Kleiner was bludgeoned in her bed at Chi Omega sorority at Florida State University, and Kathy also survived the attack.
On the 15th of January 1978 still, 21-year-old Cheryl Thomas was bludgeoned as she slept. She was 8 blocks from the Chi Omega sorority house, and Cheryl survived the attack.
And Bundy's final assault before his arrest on February 9th of 1978, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach was abducted from her junior high school in Lake City, in Florida. Her partially mummified remains were found near Suwannee River State Park, 43 miles or 69 kilometers west of Lake City.
I think it's just so crazy, to escape, and he got to get away with more
Yeah,
before getting arrested again. It's
like
just
that's
crazy.
fucking insane.
Um, so then I'm moving on to the last section really.
Yeah.
Ted Bundy is still a suspect in multiple unsolved homicides and disappearances and is likely to blame for others that may never be identified. In
Mm-hmm.
1987, he told Robert Keppel that there were some murders he would never talk about because they were committed too close to home, too close to family, or involved victims who were very young. In 2011, Ted Bundy's complete DNA profile, which was obtained from a vial of his blood, found in an evidence vault, was added to the FBI's database for future reference in other unsolved murder cases, and the following that we will go through that he is suspected of.
So this is one that Josh touched on briefly earlier, in the first part. So on August 30th, 1961, 8-year-old Anne Marie Burr vanished from her family home during a violent storm. During the night, Anne had brought her younger sister Mary to their parents' room because Mary had a cast on some part of her body I didn't actually see, and it was bothering her. Their mother, Beverly, spoke to them both before sending them back to bed. Around 5 a.m., Beverly woke up with a bad feeling. She checked on the children and found Anne was not in her bed. She then discovered that the living room window, which they usually kept open just a crack for the TV's antenna wire, was now fully open and a garden bench had been placed beneath it on the outside of the house. Police investigators turned up a smallish footprint consistent with a teenage boy outside the window, as well as a red thread. Anne's body has never been found, and one of her neighbours was 14-year-old Ted Bundy, leading to much speculation that Anne was Bundy's first victim, though Bundy has denied this claim.
The more I hear that, even after going over, kind of thought briefly mentioning it earlier, and then hearing it again there,
Yeah,
the more I'm kind of more inclined to think it was him,
yeah,
even at that age. Um,
man was playing with knives at 3.
yeah, exactly. Do you know what I mean? He was fairly advanced on the psychopathy scale.
Yeah,
So, in the early hours of June 23rd, 1966, flight attendants 20-year-old Lonnie Trumbull and Lisa Wick were beaten in their sleep with a blunt object. It is speculated that it was around midnight. Speculation of the time is based on the last known contact with either of the women, and a neighbour saw a car speeding away from the apartment at about 12:15 a.m. Lonnie and Lisa lived with another flight attendant called Joyce, but she wasn't home that night. Joyce came home at around 9:30 a.m. and she noticed that the door of the apartment was unlocked and that the lights had been left on. Obviously, she found this strange and hesitated to enter the apartment. She stood outside the door and called for her roommates, but when there was no response, she went into the apartment where she was met with a bloody crime scene. Lonnie and Lisa's pillows were soaked with blood, and on the walls near their heads there was a blood splatter. Joyce, as anyone would be, was terrified and ran from the apartment to seek help from the landlord, who phoned the police to report the incident. Once the scene was being examined, it was found that Lisa was still alive, but barely. She was rushed to hospital for critical care and she survived. Sadly, Lonnie was pronounced dead on arrival. Lonnie's autopsy and an examination on Lisa revealed that neither of them had been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, the investigation of the scene only produced a few clues. There were no signs of forced entry, indicating that the door had either been left unlocked or the lock was flimsy enough to be picked without leaving behind any evidence. The perpetrator had left behind fingerprints and a full palm print. The murder weapon was a 1.5 foot long piece of wood and was found stained with blood in an empty lot nearby. Beside the weapon was a girdle belonging to one of the women. As well as this, one of the women's flight attendant bags were stashed near the vacant lot as well. Nothing else seemed to be missing from the property, including expensive items, thus essentially ruling out robbery as a motive. Based on the level of brutality, the police theorised that the perpetrator was someone one or both of the young women knew. Um, the police, with their theory that the attacker was known to the women, began looking for suspects. And the police questioned almost 100 people who knew Lonnie and Lisa, and even polygraphed some of them. Any suspects they had were cleared due to having an alibi or passing a polygraph. As Lisa recovered, her memory of that night began to return, and she worked with police to make a composite sketch. The sketch did not produce any substantial leads. Only one of the suspects that arose during the investigation seems plausible, and that was the son of the apartment owner who died to suicide not long after the attack. Um, the possibility of Ted Bundy being a suspect did not arise until Robert Capel, one of the detectives on the Bundy murder cases, started to compare the nuances of the crime scene against Bundy's known crimes. Capel pointed out the similarities to the Chi Omega sorority attack. The victims in that case were, as we know, also at home sleeping and beaten with a blunt object. When Capel asked Bundy about the attack on Lisa and Lonnie, Bundy denied having any involvement. At a later date, Lisa Wick contacted Anne Rule, author of The Stranger Beside Me. Lisa confided in Anne that the sight of Bundy's eyes deeply disturbed her and told Anne that she believed that Bundy was the one who attacked her and Lonnie. At the time of the attack on Lisa and Lonnie, Bundy would have been 19 years old and lived at his parents' home in Tacoma. While it is possible that by that age Bundy could have been physically strong enough to brutally attack two women, you would wonder, would he have had the confidence and ability to contain and control two women by then?
Yeah.
Um, Bundy's fingerprints and palm prints were not a match to the ones found at the scene. They were tested in 1977, but it's also worth keeping in mind that the scene was far from secure, and back then fingerprinting was not as good as it is now.
Yeah.
While it is possible that Bundy was the perpetrator in the murder of Lonnie and attack of Lisa, there was nowhere near enough, if any, substantial evidence to prove it. While the MO might match up with Bundy's MO, unfortunately, it's a very common one. Um, in my opinion, based on the evidence and so on, I don't think Bundy was the person who committed this crime. I do
No.
think it's suspicious that the landlord's son committed suicide not long after the attacks, but
Well,
that could be merely a sad coincidence at the same
yeah.
time. I do wonder, did they check the fingerprints and palm prints of the landlord's son against those at the crime scene? And with there being no evidence of forced entry, could he have used the spare key that his dad, the landlord, may have had? Now, of course, I'm only speculating, and with the lack of
Yeah.
evidence in this case, it is a possibility it was Bundy. It's as much a possibility that it was Bundy as it is the landlord's son, or even some randomer
Exactly.
who was never even a suspect at all.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's that.
yeah. So on May 30th, 1969, Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry, who were both 19 years old, were both stabbed to death near Somers Point, near Atlantic City. They had been staying in Ocean City as they were on vacation, and the two had been heading back to Pennsylvania when at around 4:30 a.m. in hopes of they were heading back to Pennsylvania, and they'd left early because they wanted to beat traffic, and they stopped for breakfast at Somers Point Diner at around 4:30 a.m. They left an hour later at 5:30 a.m. and not much is known about their movements after this time. A state trooper came across their powder blue 1966 Chevrolet convertible abandoned by the Parkway at around noon on May 30th. May 30th, sorry. And then he had the car removed because it was obviously abandoned. 3 days later, their bodies were discovered under piles of leaves in the woods about 200 yards away from where their car had been found. Susan Davis was nude and her clothes were in a pile near her body, along with her jacket and purse. And Elizabeth Perry was dressed but missing her underwear. And reports vary on whether they were sexually assaulted. Now, the link to Ted Bundy is basically just that Bundy had told forensic psychologist Art Norman that his first murder was of two women in the Philadelphia area, and he is considered a strong suspect in the case, but it's still an open case.
Yeah, like there's no actual real evidence to tie him to it.
Yeah,
It's just his word, and what he said matches up with that.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Um, so then in the early hours of July 20th, 1971, 24-year-old Rita Patricia Curran was found lying on the bedroom floor of her ground floor apartment near the University of Vermont campus in Burlington, Vermont. She was found by her roommate Beverly Lampier,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Beverly had got back from a date at around 1 a.m. Rita's body was just inside the bedroom that she shared with Beverly. Her body was partially nude, bloodied, and she was on her back. Rita's hair was in curlers. She was likely attacked as she was getting ready for bed. Beverly's boyfriend attempted to resuscitate Rita, but sadly it was too late. The time of death was later given at around midnight. Rita had been murdered within a 2 hour period, as that was how long she was alone for. The perpetrator had already fled. It is possible that he could have heard Rita's roommate come home and then fled, or he could have been gone a little while. Um, Lawrence Harris, the chief medical examiner, said Rita had been brutally beaten about the head and face by fists, signs of an intense struggle, but her cause of death was ruled to have been manual strangulation. Rita had been sexually assaulted but not raped. Her torn underwear were found under her body. Neighbours had not reported hearing any screams or anything unusual. Rita's purse had $20 in it that had not been taken, ruling out robbery as a motive. There were no signs of forced entry, but apparently the girls generally left their apartment unlocked. Bloodstains indicated that the killer left through the kitchen and out the back door. No usable fingerprints were found at the scene. The Burlington Free Press said that Rita had been getting mysterious phone calls late at night, reportedly only consisting of heavy breathing and silence, and she had told her friends about them. In the days and months after the murder of Rita, reports of threatening phone calls to single young women poured in, and numerous women reported late-night intruders who fled when they screamed. Other women had come forward reporting a peeping Tom that they had been seen mostly around, sorry, that had been seen, the peeping Tom had been seen mostly around the university area. Detective Lieutenant Richard Beaulieu said that his men were checking for a connection between Rita's murder and several assaults on other young women in the area of Burlington. A home invasion had taken place only a week prior, where a 20-year-old woman was woken at 4 a.m. and raped in her own bed by a male she described as being 16 to 17 years old. Another home invasion involving a knife attack on a sleeping young woman took place the previous October, only 3 blocks from Rita's apartment. The suspect was scared off when the woman began to scream as he stabbed her. He dropped the knife and then fled. It is not known whether the person who committed these crimes was ever caught, because I suppose they don't know if it was Bundy or if it was someone else. Um, there were suspects in the investigation, but there was never enough evidence for an arrest. All of the suspects were related to were men in the area who had prior convictions for rape or other sexual offences. Rita's roommates and Beverly's boyfriend were all investigated and cleared. Not even the offer of a $3,000 reward for information produced any leads, and the case quickly went cold. The Burlington Free Press reported in July of 1979 that out of the 4 major suspects from the early investigation, 2 had died and 2 were in prison on murder charges, which supposedly had no resemblance to the murder of Rita. Rita's mother, Mary Curran, said that she believed there had been a cover-up of some kind. She said, "We felt a lot more could have been done, but wasn't for political reasons." Mary also said that Rita had only been living in the apartment a few weeks and had planned to move back home to her parents' house, as she had never lived independently before and had had an argument with her roommates about a young man spending the night. In one post I read, the author Tiffany Jean, who runs her own Ted Bundy research blog, said that while she was researching the case, she spoke to a woman who was a teenager in Burlington at the time of Rita's murder, and this woman said her parents were close friends with Rita's family. The woman said that Rita was found bound with piano wire, and I'm pretty sure there was something about how it was bound so tight that there was like cuts and scratches and whatnot on the skin. Um, She also said that the police suspected the son of a prominent judge, but did not have sufficient evidence to charge a high-profile member of the community's son with the crime, and instead his family put him into a mental institution. Now, how true any of that is, I don't know. How much credibility can you give an anonymous source that produces no proof, or at least no proof that I know of? But with that said, however, I do find that claim interesting and would be willing to believe it may be true or somewhat true when you take into account what Rita's mother said about political reasons getting in the way of the case.
Yes.
And disclaimer, I also completely understand why someone would want to speak off the record and anonymously, but sometimes I think unless it leads to something like the discovery of evidence or the likes, it is important to take it with a pinch of salt.
But when you think about it, Ted Bundy wouldn't have had the political connections when he was a teenager, like if he would fit the age for the suspect. like the peeping Tom.
How do you mean?
Because remember you mentioned that there was like reports of a peeping Tom, and you said the one girl that was raped described a suspect of around 16 to 17 years old. So is that the age Ted Bundy would have been at that time,
I'm
or
not
was this
sure.
what year
I
was
would
it?
assume so if they were to consider him as a suspect. But also, that was also just mentioning another thing that was happening around the same time.
Yeah, but what year was it?
That was 19. Is it 71? 1971, yeah.
Oh yeah, so I think he would have been in college then. Yeah, so he would have had the political connections.
And even
Um,
political connections aside, it doesn't matter because they were saying that the only other suspect was the son of a judge in the community,
oh yes.
which wouldn't be
So
Bundy.
yeah, sorry, I was in a different place there.
Um,
Is it my
oh,
turn or
no, I'm still going.
continue?
And the
I'm
first
present.
person to suspect Ted Bundy may have been involved in the murder of Rita was John Bassett, a retired FBI agent. This
Mm-hmm.
suspicion was reported by Anne Rule in her book The Stranger Beside Me. According to Anne, John Bassett was intrigued by the remarkable resemblance between Rita Curran and Bundy's first girlfriend Diane Edwards. Bundy's first. Wait, what? English, Josh. Yeah. The fact that Rita had died from strangulation and bludgeoning to the head, and the Colonial Motor Inn where Rita worked was close to the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers, where Bundy was born.
Oh,
Perhaps Bundy had visited the Lund home in the summer of 1971, became overcome with rage about his illegitimacy, and killed Rita Curran. Anne Rule also claimed in her book that the municipal dog catcher records show that a person named Bundy was bitten by a dog that week. However, with all of that said, there are no records at all of Bundy making his way to the East Coast in 1971. Rita's sister Mary sent a telegram to Florida's death row asking Bundy if he was involved in the murder of Rita, but Bundy refused to confirm or deny the crime. In the moments before his execution, Bundy denied having committed any murders in Vermont. Burlington Police Chief Kevin Scully said, "We have looked into the possibility of Ted Bundy's involvement and were satisfied that at the time of Rita Curran's murder, Bundy was somewhere else in the country." In 2016, after Rita's siblings had published a memorial notice looking for answers, Vermont law enforcement looked at the case again. Evidence from the crime scene was tested for DNA and leads were investigated again. Bundy's DNA profile had been uploaded to the CODIS database in 2011, which is the Combined DNA Index System. Any DNA from the crime scene, in theory, should have shown a match if Bundy was the perpetrator, but to this day, Rita Curran's murder is still unsolved.
okay, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
So on July 22nd, 1971, 21-year-old Joyce LePage was dropped off at her apartment by her friends. Joyce was a licensed private pilot, and she also was taking skydiving lessons, and she was due to do her first parachute jump the next day, but she never turned up and she missed all of her university classes. A few days later, police, well, I say a few days later, she actually wasn't reported missing for 10 days.
Oh, wow.
And I couldn't find out why that was. But basically, once police got involved a few days after, so she'd been missing for 10 days, and a few days after that, police found her car parked 4 blocks away from her apartment. Her shoes and her purse were in the car, but her ID and her keys were missing. Now, a neighbour said that they had seen Joyce getting into a car with 2 unknown men, and a psychic also said that he had seen a vision of Joyce getting on a plane to Argentina with a Latin boyfriend, but neither of these leads panned out. 9 months later, a teenager was searching for gems in a dry creek bed near in a dry creek bed, and they came across Joyce's skeletal remains hidden under dense brush at the bottom of a deep ravine in, I'm going to butcher this, Wawai
How's
Canyon.
that spelled?
Wawai.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try.
Wawai Canyon. Her nude body had been wrapped in a large green shag carpet which had actually been reported missing from the women's dormitory, which was called Stevens Hall at Washington State University in the summer of 1971, when it was under renovations. Now, Joyce was known to frequent the empty building because it was a safe haven for her to go and write and read, and she loved to play the grand piano that they had in there. Even though her friends and I'm sure her brother said to her, like, it's really dangerous to go in there on your own at night and things like that. And it's believed that she attended a party at the dorm the night of her disappearance, but because she wasn't reported missing for 10 days and the police didn't find out about her connection to Stevens Hall or about the party until after that 10 days, it was they couldn't find any evidence.
Okay.
And I think this is just linked to Bundy because he would have been at the University of Washington around this time.
Oh, yes, because I was going to say, actually, yeah, I forgot he attended there because I was thinking it sounds like it would be another student.
Mm-hmm. And I forgot to mention she was a student at the University of Washington. Sorry about that.
So, yeah, that sounds like it could be him. I'm surprised he even used a rug, though.
Yeah.
If it was.
It would have
So,
been the early days.
yeah, that's true. On the 24th of June 1972, 22-year-old Kerry May Hardy disappeared from the Capitol Hill area of Seattle. Kerry's disappearance was reported to the Seattle police by her mother. So remember that was the 24th of June. On the 6th of September 2010.
2010?
Yeah, so on the 24th of June 1972 was when she disappeared and her mother reported her to the Seattle police. And on the 6th of September 2010, Kerry's remains were found on the Suncadia Resort property near Ronald in Kittitas County, around 5 miles or 8 kilometres off of Interstate 90. A backhoe operator found the bones as the crew were putting a sprinkler system in place for a golf course. The police were notified of the discovery, but the remains could not be immediately identified. A bone sample was sent to the Center for Human Remains in Texas to be DNA tested. A composite sketch was generated from the remains by a forensic artist in conjunction with the King County Medical Examiner's office. Upon seeing the sketch in a media report, Kerry's family contacted the Kittitas, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, County Sheriff's Office, as they believed the sketch closely resembled Kerry. On Wednesday, the 1st of June 2011, the Centre for Human Remains notified the Sheriff's Office that the bone sample had been a match to a DNA sample collected from Kerry's mother in 2004 by the King County Sheriff's detectives during the Green River Killer investigation. Whether Ted Bundy was involved in her disappearance and death is merely speculation. Kerry does look like someone Bundy would have gone for. She was pretty, she had long straight hair, parted in the middle, and she was very young. Bundy was known to dispose of victims near Interstate 90, and the location where Kerry's body was found was only 5 miles from Bundy's mass grave at Taylor Mountain. Now, I couldn't find a whole pile on this section from what I have. I find it hard to come to a conclusion from what we have so far, or at least a concrete conclusion. I do find it very suspicious that where Kerry's body was found was so close to the mass grave where Bundy had his other victims, but I don't know if that is enough for me to 110% say that he's responsible. But I'm like, what are the odds on a serial killer and a random one-off killer or a different serial killer deciding to dump in the same place? But at the same time, if it's off an interstate, opportunity, I don't know.
Yeah, it's opportunistic, yeah.
And now over to you.
So I have 2 victims here that I'm going to speak about, and I will say for my next couple of victims and for the victims that I've already covered, there wasn't a lot of information on their cases.
My next, I think the rest of mine are, the next 3 that are very short.
Yeah, I'm the same. So on June 29th, 1973, 17-year-old Rita Lorraine Jolly left her parents' house and told them she was going for a walk, which was something that she did often. Unfortunately, Rita never returned home, and her father, who never believed she would run away or disappear willingly, worked endlessly to keep the case going. He hand-delivered letters to the police and local news stations begging for help.
Bless.
But Rita has never been seen again, and she's never been found. And then on August 20th, 1973, 24-year-old Vicky Lynn Holler walked to her car with a co-worker after finishing up work. She was a seamstress, I believe, and she had been working at that job for about 2 weeks at this point. And she was due to go to a party with her friends, but she never turned up, and she was again never seen again. Now, Rita and Vicky are often linked to Bundy because he confessed to 2 murders in Oregon, which is where they both went missing. But he never named his victims in Oregon, and these 2 were deemed to kind of fit his profile, I suppose.
And what were the names of those ones again, did you say?
Rita Jolly and Vicky Holler.
So sad.
It's awful, like.
Uh, oh, I'm so then next is 19-year-old Sandra Jean Weaver, originally from Wisconsin, but had been living in, I don't even know how to say this, Tuel in Utah. She was last seen in Salt Lake City on the 1st of July 1974. On the 2nd of July, her body was found near Grand Junction, Colorado. Sandra had been beaten and strangled, and there are conflicting sources as to whether Bundy mentioned Sandra in his death row interviews. The murder of Sandra Jean Weaver is still unsolved.
So on April 15th, 1975, 18-year-old Melanie Suzanne Cooley, better known as Susie, disappeared after leaving Nederland High School in Nederland, Colorado, which is 50 miles or 80 kilometers northwest of Denver. 2 weeks later, her body was discovered in Coal Creek Canyon, which is 20 miles or 32 kilometers away. She had been bludgeoned and strangled. Gas station receipts do place Bundy in nearby Golden, Colorado on the day that Cooley disappeared, and she is included in some compilations of Bundy victims, but Jefferson County authorities say the evidence is inconclusive and continue to treat her case as a cold case.
Okay. On the 29th of June 1975, 24-year-old Shelley K. Robertson vanished. The day she disappeared, she was wearing bell-bottom jeans, a t-shirt with the bane of a rock band on the front.
The bane of a rock band.
Basically the logo. Anyway, and hiking boots. I don't even know why I use that wording. On the 21st of August 1975, Shelley's decomposing body was found in the Willie Mae mine around 1 mile east of Berthoud Falls, Colorado. Bundy was questioned about the case of Shelley K. Robertson in Salt Lake City in 1976, and Bundy said, "I don't want to talk about that." Gas station receipts had placed Bundy in the area at the time, but there is no concrete or direct evidence of his involvement, and the case remains open.
Okay. So on July 4th, 1975, 23-year-old Nancy Perry Baird disappeared from the gas station that she worked at in Layton, Utah, which is 25 miles or 40 kilometers north of Salt Lake City. And Nancy has never been found or seen again, and she remains classified as a missing person. And to be honest, I'm not really sure why she is thought to be linked to Bundy. Like, her kidnapping did not fit the profile of Bundy's past crimes, for a number of reasons, and he explicitly denied any involvement in this case, even when he was giving his interviews while he was on death row.
Yeah. Maybe he was just happened to be passing through the area at the time, so people are just saying.
It could just be because it's close to Salt Lake City, and he was in Salt Lake City at one point.
Yeah. So then the last one is 17-year-old Debbie Smith was last seen in early February of 1976 in Salt Lake City, not long before the Carol Durange trial started. Debbie's body was found on the 1st of April 1976 near Salt Lake International Airport. Debbie is listed as a victim of Bundy by some sources, but her murder remains officially unsolved.
And that is...
So I don't really know why some sources are listing her as a victim of Bundy when it's an unsolved murder, but anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of the same as with Nancy Baird.
But and
that's the case, guys. That's the
that's
case.
Ted Bundy. That was a big one.
This is big. Yeah, it's what, like, the first part was 1 hour and 10.
I can't remember, but it was definitely around an hour. And then this part 2 was going to be a thick one.
Yeah, beast.
But
like,
yeah,
it's
once
at least an hour and
again,
a half.
Yeah. Once again, guys, thanks for
Thank you
listening.
for listening.
Shoot out the 5-star reviews.
Yeah, if you don't leave us a 5-star review, your phone is not going to charge and you're going to miss your alarms. You're going to be late for work.
Ooh. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys. And make sure to send in any requests, whatnot. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, you know the rest.
Don't be afraid to talk to us. We're nice people.
And very that. So
Very that.
again, thank you very much, and we hope you
will listen to us
found
again.
the cases interesting. And see you. Well, you will hear us again next week, hopefully.
Whether you want to or not.
Exactly.
Bye.
Ciao.